Grunwald and reporter at The Spectator, Cindy Yu. So welcome back to both of you. We're going to kick off with The Guardian because this is a story that's across a lot of the papers, as you would imagine, and this really crucial time in the war in Ukraine. Today, the Prime Minister holding this virtual meeting with allies about what they can do. Zoe, talk us through The Guardian's take on this.
Yes, so this is a warning from Keir Starmer to Vladimir Putin that he cannot play games with the possibility of a ceasefire. He's meeting a host of nations today. So this is the European Commission, European nations, NATO, Canada, Ukraine, Australia, New Zealand. They're all going to take part in this big virtual meeting and they're going to provide updates about how they're going to achieve a peace deal. This meeting obviously comes off the back of weeks of conversations over a ceasefire, what Russia wants, what Ukraine wants. But I think the big topic of conversation in this particular meeting is what allies to Ukraine can do to ensure that not only Ukraine is happy with the terms of a ceasefire, but they can stop Putin from reinvading.
Well, yes, and all of this obviously dependent on what Putin's response will be. So far, he's made a few positive noises saying, I back the idea of a ceasefire, but then his red lines run completely counter to what Ukraine wants.
Yes, he's set out a list of conditions such as Ukraine not rearming during this 30-day truce, such as NATO forces not being present in Ukraine, having a permanent peace, and the idea that Crimea, you know, all of those disputed areas might be recognised internationally as Russian territory, which is, you know, so this is the kind of Ukrainian and the European response, is he's setting out conditions that we cannot accept. He's deliberately foiling these peace talks. The question is, does President Trump agree with that? Or does he still think that actually Putin is playing nice? And so as we are all kind of following Trump in this kind of coercive negotiating process, the question is, will Trump see that Putin is kind of dragging this out and trying to get the best deal possible for himself? Or will he actually think that actually Putin's playing along and it's you guys who are just don't actually want peace? He accused Zelensky of not wanting peace. So
yeah, and we've very publicly seen the pressure that President Trump can put on President Zelensky. What we don't know is how much pressure he'll put on President Putin.
That's absolutely right. It is the case that, as much as we have seen, there have been some slightly hardening or coarsening of Trump's language towards Putin over the past few weeks. But actually, you're right, it seems like he is much harder on Zelensky. And the bridge that Keir Starmer has had to play between Zelensky and Trump has been pretty significant. But obviously, that relationship with Putin isn't as highly tested.
OK, let's move on to a different issue. Inside the Times, this is about AI and some of the concerns about copyright for those in the creative industry.
Yes, and this comes after the new Science Secretary, Peter Kyle, has been holding a consultation with tech companies about how do we make the UK more attractive to you guys. And one thing that they've clearly said is it'd be great if they could get to scrape all of this creative stuff off the internet, as they currently do. And the UK is kind of in a competitive world with the EU and the US for all this kind of tech investment. So it wants to make ourselves as attractive as possible. And so what it's suggesting is that tech companies can use creative industry output unless they opt out. So that opt out is what the creative industries is now kind of opposing, because they're saying, well, you know, actually they should not be using any copyrighted material at all without paying us, rather than us opting out. So now we're seeing a bit of a tussle.
How they opt out as well.
Exactly, and it just hasn't been very clear. And some representatives in the creative industry have said that they haven't been consulted by the government when the tech companies have. And so they're basically making their voice heard now. And this is the tricky thing, isn't it, about generative AI, about journalists like us. You know, when we put our work out there, there is a paywall, there is a copyright issue there. And if AI is going to be, you know, taking the lead in these things in the future, you know, you do kind of wonder where that kind of copyright line lies. And on the other hand, you know, the government wants to boost growth in the country.
Well, yes, and probably wants to keep US tech firms on side as part of any future sort of trade deal, keeping them sweet and you know, who knows the influence of Elon Musk in all this as well. But what do you make of this? Because you've got to have some sympathy with creative people feeling that their work is being used without
Absolutely. And the creative industries have been hit double hard from Brexit, from all the kind of the impact of Brexit on the ability for creatives to tour, the abilities for creatives attempts to have agreements with other states, and now there is this issue where because we are outside the UK, outside the EU, we are seeing sluggish economic growth. The Prime Minister wants to pursue AI as one of these vehicles to achieve economic growth. He wants to make the UK very, very competitive, but that again could hit these industries even harder. So I think there's this kind of double whammy of attacks on the creative industries that have happened over the last kind of 5 years or so that are now really coming to fruition.
Yeah, we'll see where that argument goes. Take us to the front page of the Daily Telegraph next, Cindy, because there's an article here about migrants and their human rights, and Article 8 of the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, and how it's applied in this country.
Right, and Article 8 says that people have a right to family life under immigration law, which means that we have had asylum seekers, even criminal asylum seekers, being allowed to stay in the country on that ground because they have family here. So the Telegraph has an example of a Pakistani paedophile who was jailed, literally jailed for child sex offences, but could not be removed from the UK because it would be unduly harsh on his own children. That was the reason.
Even though I think he wasn't allowed to see his own children.
Absolutely, and arguably shouldn't ever be allowed to see his own children. So Yvette Cooper is looking at, we're not leaving the ECHR, but are there ways we can look at how this law is being applied? Because arguably countries like Denmark apply them differently. Now, in the previous round, we were talking about Tory policies that this government is putting through. And now, of course, they're not talking about leaving the ECHR, but looking at this human rights law and the fact that it's splashing the Telegraph, again, is one of the theme of this government, because of the external circumstances, being pushed into rather right-wing approaches.
And external circumstances, does that mean the rise of reform? Do you think that it's having an influence on how politicians are portraying policy?
I think that's right. I mean, obviously, immigration has increased in salience for voters across the country, but I think we have to remember that we are at a time where reform is on the rise. There's also an upcoming by-election in Runcorn, which could see reform, on current projections, could see reform take the seat. So I think there seems to be a lot of briefing of fairly right-wing policies coming out of the Labour government at the moment, and this is one of them. I think what is quite interesting about this is it's not saying that the government is planning in any way to leave the ECHR. We know that's something that wouldn't be on Keir Starmer's radar. He's a former human rights lawyer. He loves international law and obligations. But the idea that they could look at how it is applied to stop these kind of cases splashing the Telegraph again and again, I think is quite interesting.
And one other theme that's across a lot of the papers is the spending cuts that are heading our way, but also the spring statement, and then the new tax year as well. And in fact, the Mirror puts into stark, relief there what is likely to happen to our bills once some of the already announced tax rises come into effect.
Yeah, energy bills up 6%, water bills up 26%, council tax up, broadband and mobile up, car tax up, depending on what car you have, TV licences as well. So the Mirror puts it at about £400 a year rise in bills from next month. So it really does just go show that, the external circumstances are difficult for the government, but also for your average individual. And how can you realign everything in the least regressive way possible so that it's not people who are, in fact, impacted by these bills, the worst affected by the government spending cuts that are coming down the line as well.
Yeah. Let's cheer ourselves up. We've only got about 30 seconds, maybe a little bit more, with the story in The Guardian. Talk us through it.
This makes me think about how... so basically, it's a story about tall men in this village are being attacked by a hawk who particularly doesn't like tall men. Not short men, just tall men. It makes me... it gives me a slight smile because it makes me think now they know what it's like to be a woman walking around the streets, because men are having to take their wives out with them to stop the bird from attacking them late at night when they're walking along. I think that's a good lesson in what it's like to be a woman.
Kind of like a feminist.
Yeah, it's a feminist hawk, and I like that. Yeah.
Of course, it is slightly humorous, but the people are getting lightly injured from it. So of course that's not so funny.
Obviously, yes, we don't like the injury.
But it seems like if you wear a hat, a fedora, a helmet, the hawk seems to leave you alone.
And I love the fact the Guardian sent a short reporter. Is that right?
They did.
Yeah, just in case.
It also seemed quite smug. He's saying, "Finally, it's my time."
We are under Israeli military